want to wish everyone a very happy Easter. You know, one of the things we think about in the gospel is really that first Easter. And really, that first Easter has many different emotions. You know, we think about the fact that we're there in Jerusalem, that many thought it would be the time for him to be that conquering hero, to bring about the change in to be like that King David figure of triumphal hero. But instead, what happened is Jesus was brought before Caiaphas, the high priest, brought before Pilate, crucified, was died, was put into the tomb, and then that was it, period. And so there's some great emotions. There's sadness, there's grief, there's probably a little bit of anger because they thought, okay, well, we thought he was the one, and maybe he isn't the one, he wasn't the one, so there's maybe a little bit of anger as well. And then the women came to the tomb, and so that period becomes a comma and a but. The women came to the tomb. And really, it didn't make a lot of sense for the women to come to the tomb. Certainly, it made sense that, okay, that the body was put into the tomb. It was kind of rushed. They were trying to get it done before the Sabbath, so it made sense for them to come back and kind of rearrange it. But who was going to roll back the stone? Certainly wasn't going to be the women. Certainly wasn't going to be the guards who were there guarding the tomb. And certainly the guards wouldn't allow the other disciples to come and to take away the stone. So who would it be? And so really, in a way, it didn't make sense. But in a way, it also didn't make sense when they saw the tomb because the body wasn't there. So that anger, maybe a lot of certainly grief and sadness becomes this overwhelming like wonderment, like what in the world is going on? This huge amount of perplexity in their hearts. What in the world does this mean? And so they go and they tell the disciples come and see the tomb is indeed empty, and the women stay by the tomb. And once they stay by the tomb, they have that overwhelming joy of seeing that Jesus is been raised from the dead. And so Jesus comes and talks to the disciples in time between his resurrection and his ascension. He talks to them not 24/7, he's not with them many times, but he really needs to at first explain to them what they fail to understand when Jesus talked about the three predictions of his passion. They need to understand that. And so he talks to them and explains it to them. He also takes the time to explain to them their mission, that they're not going to just be fishermen, they're not going to be tax collectors, they're going to be fishers of men, that their mission has changed. So maybe they thought, okay, well, Jesus been raised from the dead, that's a great thing, we can tell our children and our grandchildren that we spent this time with Jesus, but instead he's going to change their mission. They're going to instead be fishers of men. So what we see is Peter in the Gospel of John has this time of waiting, and so says, well, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know. Well, let's just go fishing. And so in seeing them, that's when they were changed to have that mission. And so Peter will use that mission masterfully, because one of the things about the raising of Jesus from the dead is that it was not just appearing to the people, but the people in Jerusalem itself were in wonderment as to what this would mean. They didn't know and they didn't understand. And so there was this kind of, what is this all about? This Jesus that we crucified, the tomb is now empty. And so Peter will use that to help them to understand about that Jesus was that capstone of salvation history. And being the capstone of salvation history, they need to repent, they need to be baptized. And so the people responded greatly. 3,000 were added to that number in that one day. And so certainly we think about the resurrection of Jesus changed the lives of the disciples. It changed their lives from certainly being of sadness and grief to perplexity to overwhelming joy. But then it also gave them a mission. And so what is our mission? How do we take the resurrection of Jesus from the dead? And I think one of the things we can think about is that if we're single, to really, in a way, reflect the biblical idea of being single, which is not just about what do I need or what are my needs and my wants, but how do I help and serve others? How do I use the time that I have to help and to serve others? If we're in family, it's how do I then go about making the family religion a priority, not only in taking time for Mass, but also maybe to have family time of prayer or family study, just a little bit of time each day, spending time, helping them to understand. Because really, when we think about it, our religious education in the parish is really based on having the parents taking that time. And so many things today just crowd out that time. So if we're not purposeful in taking charge of that time, other things are going to come in, other things are going to crowd in, other things are going to take their importance. And so we really need to kind of be purposeful in our families about taking time to spend time with our children, spending time in coming to Mass, spending time in maybe teaching and instruction or prayer time with the family. And in doing that, what we can do is that we can say that we've certainly tried and we've certainly done the best that we can. Certainly we can't, be assured of that everything will absolutely be perfect, but we can know in our hearts that we've certainly taken that time, that we've been purposeful in that time of helping our children to understand and to know the Lord. And so when we think about Easter, we think about those emotions, those idea of anger, maybe a little bit of anger on the part of the disciples. How did I fall? The Messiah that we were trying to follow turned out not to be the one. So that anger, that grief, that sadness, that perplexity, and ultimate joy of having the knowledge of the resurrection. And so in doing that, they changed their livelihood. So how does it change our hearts? How does it change the way that we react to others, knowing that Jesus Christ indeed has been risen and is risen indeed? Thanks again. God bless. Happy Easter.